Some people decided they didn't like you before you even spoke, before you did anything wrong, before you even had a chance. And the truth is, it's not random, it's predictable. They follow patterns, and once you see these patterns, you stop taking it personally and start taking your power back. We grow up believing that if we are kind enough, respectful enough, careful enough, everyone will accept us. But that's not how the world works. Because sometimes your presence alone becomes a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable, not because they're wrong, but because they're honest. They project their insecurities onto you because it is easier to transfer discomfort than to confront it. When someone feels uncertain about their own worth, discipline, or direction, seeing those qualities in you creates an internal tension. That tension demands resolution. But instead of resolving it through growth, they resolve it through judgment. They label you as arrogant when you are simply self-assured. They call you lucky when your results are built on consistent effort. They question your intentions when your actions are clear. This projection allows them to protect their current identity without facing the painful truth that change is required. Projection is not a conscious strategy. It is a defense mechanism. The human mind is designed to preserve self-image, even if that image is incomplete or fragile. When your presence contradicts the story someone tells themselves about their limitations, they experience psychological discomfort. And rather than rewriting their story, they rewrite yours. They assign negative meanings to your strengths so they can remain comfortable with their own inaction. Your discipline becomes obsession. Your confidence becomes ego. Your independence becomes selfishness. What makes projection powerful is that it often feels convincing, even to the person projecting. They genuinely believe their interpretation because it protects them from confronting deeper fears. Your growth becomes evidence of what is possible, and possibility can be threatening to someone who has accepted stagnation. Without saying it directly, your existence asks a question they are not ready to answer. If it is possible for you, why not for me? This dynamic reveals more about their internal conflict than anything about your character. Their reaction is not a reflection of your value, but a reflection of the gap between who they are and who they believe they could be. They create silent competition with you because comparison becomes their way of measuring self-worth. This competition is rarely spoken, and often you are not even aware it exists. While you are focused on your own path, they are focused on your pace. They observe your progress, your recognition, your confidence, and they use it as a reference point to evaluate themselves. Every milestone you reach becomes, in their mind, a reminder of distance. Distance between where they are and where they believe they should be. This silent competition is driven by scarcity thinking. They believe there is limited success, limited respect, limited opportunity. So when you gain something, they subconsciously feel like there is less available for them. Your progress does not inspire them. It threatens their sense of adequacy. Instead of seeing your growth as proof that improvement is possible, they interpret it as evidence that they are falling behind. This creates internal pressure, and pressure seeks release. Sometimes that release appears as subtle negativity, passive dismissal, or emotional distance. What makes this competition silent is that acknowledging it would require vulnerability. It would require admitting feelings of inadequacy, envy, or fear. And those emotions are uncomfortable to face. So instead, they mask it. They may pretend to support you while internally measuring themselves against you. They may downplay your progress to protect their own ego. They may withdraw, not because you harmed them, but because your presence amplifies their self-doubt. The truth is, their battle was never with you directly. It was with their own expectations, their own timeline, and their own perceived limitations. Your progress simply became the surface where their internal struggle became visible. They avoid understanding you because understanding requires effort, openness, and sometimes the willingness to change their own perspective. It is easier for them to create a fixed version of you in their mind than to engage with who you truly are. Assumptions are fast. Understanding is slow. Assumptions protect the ego, while understanding challenges it. When someone chooses not to understand you, they are choosing emotional convenience over truth. This avoidance often begins the moment they notice something different about you. It could be your mindset, your discipline, your confidence, or the way you see the world. Instead of asking questions, instead of becoming curious, they fill the gaps with their own interpretations. They define your intentions without hearing your reasons. They explain your actions without knowing your story. This creates a false certainty, and false certainty feels safer than uncertainty. Curiosity requires humility. It requires admitting that you do not know everything. But when someone feels insecure or defensive, humility feels threatening. If they allow themselves to understand you, they risk discovering that their judgments were incomplete or wrong. That realization can damage their sense of control, so they protect themselves by staying distant from the truth. Avoiding understanding also allows them to maintain emotional distance. Understanding creates connection, and connection creates responsibility. When you understand someone, it becomes harder to dismiss them, harder to resent them, harder to reduce them to a simple label. Distance makes it easier to justify negative feelings. Distance makes it easier to preserve bias. Their decision not to understand you is not a reflection of your clarity. It is a reflection of their resistance to expanding their perspective beyond the limits of their current emotional comfort. They react emotionally, not logically, because their response is driven by internal triggers rather than your actual behavior. Logic requires observation, reflection, and control. Emotion requires none of these. Emotion is immediate. It rises from deeper layers of fear, insecurity, and unresolved experiences. When someone dislikes you for no clear reason, their reaction is often not connected to what you did, but to what they felt in your presence. Emotional reactions are fast because the brain is designed to protect identity. When your confidence, clarity, or independence challenges their internal beliefs about themselves, their brain interprets it as a threat. Not a physical threat, but a psychological one. And the brain responds to psychological threats in the same protective way. It creates discomfort, defensiveness, and resistance. They may feel irritated by you without understanding why. They may feel uneasy around you without any logical explanation. Their emotion comes first, and their logic comes later to justify it. Once the emotion is present, the mind begins searching for reasons to support it. They may focus on small details, misinterpret neutral actions, or exaggerate minor flaws. This creates a story that makes their emotional reaction feel reasonable. But the story is built after the feeling, not before it. The emotion leads, and the logic follows to defend it. This is why their behavior can seem inconsistent or unfair. You may act respectfully, yet they respond with distance or negativity. You may treat them with neutrality, yet they interpret it as hostility. Their reaction is not based on objective reality, but on subjective emotional experience shaped by their own internal state. If this resonates with you, take a moment and reflect. Have you ever dimmed your light just to make someone else comfortable? And if so, is that the life you really want to live? They resist your authenticity because authenticity disrupts unspoken social agreements built on conformity. Many people learn to survive by blending in, by adjusting their personality to meet expectations, and by avoiding actions that might invite judgment. This creates a fragile sense of stability. Everyone plays their role, and no one challenges the invisible rules. But when you show up as your true self, when you speak honestly, act confidently, and live without constant approval, you break that silent agreement. Your authenticity becomes evidence that conformity was never the only option. This creates internal conflict in those who have suppressed parts of themselves. Your freedom highlights their restriction. Your honesty highlights their silence. Your willingness to be seen highlights their fear of exposure. Even if they cannot explain it, your presence reminds them of choices they did not make and versions of themselves they abandoned. Authenticity carries certainty, and certainty can feel intimidating to someone who has built their identity around external validation. They may interpret your authenticity as rebellion, arrogance, or attention-seeking, because these labels make your behavior easier to dismiss. Accepting your authenticity as genuine would force them to question why they do not allow themselves the same freedom. It would require courage, and courage demands risk. Risk threatens comfort, and comfort is where most people remain. Authenticity also removes predictability. People feel more comfortable when they can anticipate behavior, when they can place someone into familiar categories. Authentic individuals are harder to control, harder to define, and harder to influence. This lack of control creates discomfort in those who rely on predictable social patterns to feel secure. Your authenticity becomes a silent challenge, not because you are forcing change, but because you are demonstrating that change is possible without permission. They look for flaws to justify their feelings because the human mind seeks consistency between emotion and belief. When someone feels dislike toward you without a clear reason, that emotional discomfort creates tension inside them. The brain does not like unexplained emotions. It wants reasons. It wants evidence. It wants a story that makes the feeling seem logical and deserved. So the mind begins scanning your behavior, your personality, and your actions, searching for anything that can serve as justification. This process is often selective. They do not see you fully, they see you partially. They focus on moments that confirm their negative perception while ignoring moments that contradict it. A small mistake becomes proof of incompetence. A confident decision becomes proof of arrogance. A moment of silence becomes proof of disrespect. These interpretations are not neutral observations. They are emotionally influenced conclusions designed to support an existing feeling. This protects their internal narrative. If they admit their dislike has no real foundation, they would have to confront uncomfortable questions about themselves. They would have to examine their insecurity, their comparison, or their fear. That level of self-examination requires honesty and emotional strength. It is easier to assign blame outward than to explore inward. Finding flaws in you allows them to avoid confronting flaws in their own thinking. Over time, this search for justification becomes automatic. They become more sensitive to your imperfections while remaining blind to your strengths. Their perception becomes filtered, shaped by emotional bias rather than objective reality. Even neutral actions may be interpreted negatively because their mind is already oriented toward confirming their belief. The flaw does not create the dislike. The dislike creates the search for the flaw. They distance themselves or undermine you subtly because direct confrontation would expose their true feelings, and exposure creates vulnerability. Subtlety allows them to express resistance without taking responsibility for it. Instead of openly criticizing you, they reduce their support. They become less responsive, less encouraging, less present. Their energy shifts. Conversations become shorter. Their enthusiasm fades. This distance is not always loud, but it is noticeable. Distance serves as emotional protection. Your presence may trigger comparison, insecurity, or discomfort, and creating space helps them reduce those feelings. It allows them to regain a sense of control over their emotional state. Being close to you forces them to face internal tension. Being distant allows them to avoid it. This avoidance is not always conscious. It is often an instinctive reaction to preserve emotional comfort. Undermining can appear in small, indirect ways. They may offer backhanded compliments that sound positive but carry negative undertones. They may question your decisions in subtle tones of doubt rather than direct criticism. They may withhold recognition when recognition is deserved. These behaviors are designed to reduce your perceived strength without openly challenging you. It allows them to protect their ego while avoiding open conflict. Subtle undermining also creates plausible deniability. If confronted, they can deny harmful intent because their actions were not explicitly aggressive. This ambiguity protects their self-image and social standing. It allows them to maintain the appearance of neutrality while internally expressing resistance. These behaviors reflect internal imbalance. When someone feels secure, they do not need to reduce others to feel stable. Subtle distance and quiet undermining emerge when someone is managing emotions they are unwilling or unable to confront directly within themselves. They feel uncomfortable with your growth because growth changes the emotional balance between you and them. Relationships often form around shared identities, shared habits, and shared levels of comfort. When you begin to grow, when your mindset expands, your discipline strengthens, or your standards rise, you begin to move beyond the version of yourself they became familiar with. This change disrupts the stability they relied on. They knew how to relate to the old version of you. They knew what to expect. Growth introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty creates discomfort. Your growth also removes invisible agreements that may have existed without words. Perhaps they felt equal when you doubted yourself. Perhaps they felt secure when you hesitated. Perhaps they felt comfortable when you stayed within certain limits. But when you begin to act with clarity and confidence, those invisible agreements dissolve. They may no longer feel the same sense of emotional balance. This shift forces them to confront their own position, their own progress, and their own choices. Growth creates contrast. Contrast makes differences visible. Your new habits highlight their old habits. Your new discipline highlights their inconsistency. Your new mindset highlights their hesitation. This contrast is not something you impose. It is something that naturally appears when one person evolves while another remains the same. They may interpret this contrast as distance, even if your intentions have not changed. They may also fear losing relevance in your life. As you grow, your environment, your priorities, and your direction may change. This creates uncertainty about where they fit in your future. That uncertainty can create resistance, emotional withdrawal, or negativity as a way to cope with the fear of being left behind. In the end, you must understand this. When people hate you for no reason, they are not responding to your reality. They are responding to their perception. And perception is shaped by fear, insecurity, comparison, and unspoken internal battles. Their behaviors, projection, silent competition, emotional reactions, subtle distance, are not random. They are signals of discomfort, signals of resistance, signals of inner conflict they have not yet resolved. But this is where your responsibility begins. Not to convince them, not to shrink yourself, not to earn approval that was never rooted in understanding. Your responsibility is to remain aligned with who you are becoming. Because the moment you start adjusting your identity to fit someone else's comfort, you begin disconnecting from your own purpose. You were not meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be understood by yourself. And there is a difference. One gives you temporary acceptance. The other gives you permanent strength. Some people will walk away when you grow. Some people will misunderstand you when you change. Some people will resist you when you evolve. Not because you did something wrong, but because your growth challenges what they chose to keep comfortable. So do not measure your value by their reaction. Measure it by your alignment. Measure it by your courage to continue. Measure it by your willingness to keep moving forward even when approval disappears. Because the truth is, being disliked for no reason is often the cost of becoming someone who no longer needs permission to become who they were meant to be.